Okay, today is October 6th, and this is English 235. We're going to speak again, continue with the idea of Black Zodiac. Again, I know it's a hard read. We just have to go with it. I'll give you some ideas for writing your second short essay, which will be on Black Zodiac, which is due down the road from now. Um, I'll give you some sort of ways we can sort of interpret some of the poems, some of the language, some of the imagery, some of the themes, especially the themes, the theme of time and the vastness and the expanse of time uh, that talks about often within his poetry. Just some housekeeping. I was able to get around to grading your discussion number one in Blackboard and your open-ended question number one in Blackboard, and look at towards the end of the week, say by close of business on Friday, for me to get through and comment on your Black Aperture short essay number one. So look for that, for the grade to be posted to Blackboard for that by the end of the week. So today we're looking at Black Zodiac again. Okay, we're going to continue to look at Wright's Pulitzer Prize winning collection of poetry. One of the striking things that stands out to me the most with Wright's work is his repetition of language. Within all forms of art, visual art, all forms of creative writing to include novel, creative nonfiction, memoir, and most notably poetry, the author or artist utilizes the repetition of images or descriptive language in order to imbue the work with some effect. In this case of Wright, he's attempting to repeat words that aid in materializing a theme as well as a certain tone. We're later going to discuss the idea of literary theory called structuralism. We probably touched upon it in the prior lecture on Black Zodiac. But I'm going to point out where he repeats a lot of words throughout the entire collection. And what that does, it exploits, and we're going to look at that on the next slide a couple minutes from now. It exploits and brings to the fore and brings to bear what we implicitly and explicitly know about the repetition of the word. So if he repeats the word light, well, we implicitly understand what light sort of stands for. It's a stand-in for the metaphor of good, right? As opposed to what we implicitly understand of dark or shadowy, right? It sort of implicitly we know that it imbues or communicates the idea of darkness, of badness, of ignorance even, be something being obscured. So those are all perfectly good ideas, and I'll repeat this in a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself. Of perfectly good ideas for essay topics in the future for Black Zodiac. Now, one could attempt to bulldoze through the entire collection, writing down instances the poet repeats images or language. That would take a heightened level of brute force on your part. Luckily, I have the Kindle version of Black Zodiac, and maybe you do as well, so I can do an internal search within the collection by hitting Control F. I did so, and I found a lot of interesting things. To that end, these are just a few of the repeated languages and images within Wright's collection. Let's take a look at them and then explore why. What was the point? What exactly was Wright, the poet, attempting to do through these repetitions? Okay, in his interview that we watched, he spoke about um, time, especially how we as humans are all subject to the passing of time. And then the passing of us due to time, the pressure of time upon us, right? The human condition uh, moving through the throes of space and time. This is definitely a theme that Wright often grapples with in his poetry, how the human condition is a victim of sorts to time, and how time affects our everyday mood, state of mind, and psychological disposition. When I do an internal search, the word time appears 27 times. That's quite a few times for a book of poetry that's 85 pages long. So we know this observation of time to the tune of 27 times is by no means a mistake, but is instead Wright's attempting to communicate a recurring theme to the reader. Time, as he writes in the poem Apologia Pro Vita Su, is, quote, the source of all good. Time, the engenderer of entropy and decay. Time, the destroyer, our only begetter and advocate. So he's making a bold statement about time. The actual title of this collection arose in the interview we watched. Think, as you embark on writing any essay this semester, how the title can assemble greater meaning for the single poem, but also for the breadth of the collection. In the case of the title Black Zodiac, Wright mentioned the idea of the universe, space, the vastness of it all in his interview, this dark cosmos of sorts. Or in this case, this black zodiac. He is able to establish another reoccurring theme initiated by the title of the collection, but reiterated by the repetition of such words as star, which is mentioned 25 times in the collection, dust, which is mentioned 10 times, moon, mentioned 21 times, earth, 10 times, blue, 19 times, sun, 12 times, night, 21 times, dark, 31 times, black, 27 times, and interestingly, light, that diametrically opposed word of black, light. He mentions light a grand total of 57 times within the collection. All this is for what reason, though? Surely he's doing it for a reason, right? As we mentioned, all this repetition builds a theme. In this case, the vast cosmos, the human expression upon the universe's canvas, how minuscule and insignificant we seem when etched onto its surface. And without doubt, the grand theme Wright wants to impart is none other than the concept of time. We must come to realize Wright seems to be communicating to us, the reader, without space, without the wonderment of our unknowing, without our compulsion to search out the black vastness, both internal, the black vastness of ourselves, and external, the black vastness of space and time. We can't wrench back the veil of our surroundings. And I'm using surroundings in a very general sort of way, ourselves as our surroundings, our family and friends as our surroundings, our deep inner psychology as our surroundings, the truth, if it even exists, of our very meaning. What Wright so succinctly responds in the interview we watched, quote, saying, the exterior landscape reflects the interior and vice versa, unquote. He also referred to this concept as the, quote, metaphysics of the quotidian, unquote, what he defines as the, quote, the otherworldly quality of the mundane material world. And we spoke about that last lecture. But what is all that? What that metaphysical quotidian exactly? What does it mean? As we covered last lecture, and as I'm going to reiterate here, metaphysics is defined as being, knowing, identity, time, space, all themes and subject matters conquered by Wright within this and many other of his collections. And then we get quotidian, Quotidin, quotidian, which means of or occurring every day, daily, commonplace, ordinary. So in this way, Wright is juxtaposing the themes of ordinary to that of the extraordinary, juxtaposing themes of dark and light, juxtaposing themes of internal and external, all in the quest to reveal something about ourselves and the world around us. One final note, within this collection, Wright mentions at least once every month of the year. So time, the expansion of time, this immaterial thing that is both a source of good and a source of bad, is an important and even crucial theme within Black Zodiac. And, as was mentioned before, a major personal aesthetics of Wright's in the expanse and dwindling away of time, he seems to be saying to us. He's imparting to the theme of not just time, but in order to be a theme, Wright has to be saying something about time. It can't just be the theme of the entire collection is time, or the theme of these three poems are time. It's got to be making a statement, an indictment about time. For example, we might write an essay on how Wright's exploring the theme of how time is crushing and even inevitable on all living things, for both the betterment of those living, but also moves towards their detriment, as time will always ultimately win out. These weighted themes that Wright imbues in his work is what I would call, and you should remember this from the list of elements of poetry, his personal aesthetic. That is to say, these are the topics, themes, tones, images, subject matter that Wright has always dealt with and most likely always will within his work. All of this is subject matter that we're assessing today, can be topics you discuss in your essay on Black Zodiac. Okay, let's move on. Okay, structuralism, as we mentioned before, binary oppositions, what the heck are they? Let's go over some. We mentioned some of the repetition of language, so that's where the binaries come in, the black, the light, the white, the dark, standing in place of meaning of some sort in its repetition, building meaning through its repetition, building a theme. So we're going to drill down here pretty deeply on these literary theories of structuralism. So another key concept within Black Zodiac, and something that Wright would have been highly methodical about, is the inclusion of binaries or binary oppositions. Think of language that opposes or is vying against its opposite meaning. And when you think about binary oppositions, light versus dark would be a potent example, the yin versus the yang. Let's go ahead and give this greater context by establishing a more precise definition. A nebular opposition, also called binary system, that's the term we're going to use because that's the literary term, binary opposition, is a pair of related terms or concepts that are opposite in meaning. Binary opposition is the system by which, in language and thought, two theoretical opposites are strictly defined and set off against one another. It is the contrast between two mutually exclusive terms, such as on and off, up and down, left and right, a few sort of pedestrian terms. Binary oppositions is an important concept of structuralism, which sees such distinctions as fundamental to all language and thought. In structuralism, a binary opposition is seen as a fundamental organizer of human philosophy, culture, and language. We have to remember, too, how these binaries, in many instances, is how we interpret implicitly and explicitly the meaning of the binary itself. That is to say, each of us implicitly have an understanding of light being good and dark or shadowy being bad. Explicitly, society, through art and pop culture, reinforces our implicit belief of this system. All right, so that's kind of complicated, but just know structuralism dictates that language, we all have an implicit or internal understanding of what these things mean, what light means, what dark means, what other binary oppositions mean. There's already built-in meaning, but there's explicit meaning as well from the culture that we live in, pop culture and society that we live in, that gives us out external meaning, right? We have the internal versus the external, and that builds meaning through language. Binary opposition originated in the Saussurean structuralist theory, according to Ferdinand de Saussure. That's who we see here next to the yin yang. The binary opposition is the means by which the units of language have value or meaning. Each unit is defined in reciprocal determination with another term, as in binary code, if you remember that from programming, 0 versus 1. A lot could be said in programming with 0 versus 1. Is it a 0 or is it a 1? It is not a contradictory relation, but a structural complementary one. Saussure demonstrates that a sign's meaning is derived from its context and the group to which it belongs. An example of this is that one cannot conceive of good if we do not understand evil. So that would be something interesting to think about in Wright's work, the good versus the evil, the dark versus the light. Paired opposites rely upon a relationship with adjoining words. If one of the paired opposites were removed, the other's precise meaning would be altered or even dissolve. So if we removed all the words that sort of build to be dark or black or ominous or obscured within black Zodiac, then it would etch away and chip away at what the light and the white parts mean, the lighter parts of the language being used that he's grappling with within the collection. So by one existing, the other one is able to exist, and they exist equally. Black's not better than white, white's not better than black. I'm not talking about race here, but I'm talking about just the idea of what we implicitly bring to the table with regard to what black and white means. Typically, one of the two opposites assumes the role of being preferable over the other. Furthermore, Peter Fiore discovered that binary oppositions have a deeper or second level binaries that help reinforce meaning. So don't get too wrapped around the axle on this. As an example, the concepts hero and villain involve secondary binaries, good, bad, liked, disliked, black and white, and so on. For political reasons, the role of certain binaries are often called into question using means of deconstruction. Certain terminology, such as civilized or uncivilized, tends to have connotations applied to specific cultures, which is seen as underlying certain biases. The way Wright is able to approach binary oppositions is through, as I mentioned before, the repetition of certain language. That's how he's applying it to this collection. Again, Wright includes light 57 times, his binary opposition black 27 times, dark 31 times, and night 21 times. This, we said, is to extract greater meaning by comparing these vying, sometimes conflicted, and even other times complementary terms. To that end, Wright uses the self-referential word me 46 times, but the more inclusive word our 90 times. There's a certain imbalance here. To what end, though? Perhaps, and even seemingly, Wright is proffering the greater good of all of us over the inclusivity of simply a single entity. Another example, and I'll end with our lesson on binaries with this. It's an equilibrium Wright strikes by mentioning the word bad 7 times and the word good 7 as well. With all the chaos, with all the dynamism of everyday dilemmas, Wright seems to be saying there exists a great balance. Okay, I feel as if Wright is definitely addressing that same theme of equilibrium applied to the human condition. that metaphysical quotidian, he's calling it, which we come to realize is the blending of the extraordinary and the ordinary. We can see it here in the poem Envoy. I'll go ahead and read it aloud. Envoy. What we once liked, we no longer like. What we used to delight in settles like fine ash on our tongues. What we once embraced embraces us. Things have destinies, of course. Onlines and downloads mysterious as the language of clouds. My life has become like that. Half uninterpretable, half new geography. Landscapes stilled and abundated, memory unratcheting, its voiceover, not my own. Meanwhile, the mole goes on with the subterranean daydreams. The dogs lie around like rugs. Birds nitpick their pin feathers. Insects slick down their shells. No horizon honing here. No angst in the anthill. What happens is what happens. And what happens to happen never existed to start with. Still, who wants life like that? No text and no next and no before. No yesterday, no today. Tomorrow, a moment no one will ever live in. As for me, I'll take whatever wanes. The loosening traffic on the straightaway, the dark and such, the wandering stars, wherever they come from now, wherever they go. I'll take whatever breaks down beneath its own sad weight. The paintings of Albert Pinkham Ryder, for instance, language, the weather, the word of God. I'll take as icon and testament the daytime metaphysics of the natural world. Sun on tie post, rock on rock. All right, well, I love the language and the imagery going on in this poem. Each a great concept and or subject matter, the imagery and language of Envoy for crafting your own essay around. Uh, we get a great balancing act here, whereby Wright is allowing the narrator to see the world through both ends. We see that throughout the entire poem, but what really emerges for me is the idea of half. He says, quote, half uninterpretable, half new geography, unquote. This is another personal aesthetic of Wright's, the idea of half or halves. In fact, he mentions half 20 times in the collection Black Zodiac. This poem seems to strike a chord with another literary theory, in this case, post-structuralism. We spoke before about structuralism with its binary oppositions. Now we're looking at post-structuralism, which believes that language is a key and that words and sentences do not reflect or represent any external reality. There's a famous, I know it sounds at odds with itself, but let's just explore that. There's a famous surrealist painting by Rene Magritte titled The Treachery of Images. I implore you to look it up. Where all we see is a pipe for smoking tobacco, right? So a smoking pipe, accompanied below it by the words which translate into English as, "This is not a pipe." Magritte later remarked how reliant we've become on the message of the image. How we believe that a painting could possibly really be a pipe is incredulous and even unimaginable to him. The image does not reflect or represent an external world, but is instead only paint organized in some uniform way on a canvas, Magritte seems to be saying. Similarly, if we look at the eighth tercet of this poem, Wright seems to be communicating that same brand of post-structuralist theory, whereby language is unstable. It doesn't necessarily represent reality. He says, quote, I'll take whatever breaks down beneath its own sad weight. The paintings of Albert Pinkham Ryder, for instance, language, the weather, the word of God, unquote. Like the painting of the pipe being unstable or not having complete fidelity to the actual pipe, language, Wright seems to be echoing post-structuralism, is unstable, highly interpretive, and therefore has the ability to break down beneath its own sad weight. So if you think about post-structuralism is really saying language is unstable. The image and language are not necessarily compatible, but mainly that language is unstable. It's not, we can't rely upon it. There's not perfect objective truths in language, right? That's why we could be sort of persuaded so easily in politics, in advertisement, because the language means something sort of subjective to each of us. It's interesting to note the weight of the title brings to the poem. An envoy is a short stanza concluding a ballad or is an author's concluding words. In this case, you could think of ballad as a narrative poem. Additional meaning can be derived by way of the poem being the concluding poem to the first section of this entire collection. We, at this point, know that Wright has concluded one movement of his concerto of sorts, and it's probably in some measurable way going to shift to something else, or at least shift in some way. Okay, so I enjoyed reading your favorite poem and why that you responded to on Blackboard. I thought I would take this time to share two of mine out of this collection. I'll go ahead and read it aloud. This one's called Poem Half in the Manner of Lee Ho. Sorry, the R was cut off here for in manner. All things aspire to weightlessness, some place beyond the lip of language, some silence, some zone of grace. Sky white is raw silk, opening mirror cold sprung in the west, sunset like dead grass. If God hurt the way we hurt, he, too, would be heartsore, disconsolate, unappeasable. Lee Ho, the story goes, would leave home each day at dawn, riding a colt, a servant boy walking behind him, an antique tapestry bag strapped to his back. When inspiration struck, Ho would write the lines down and drop them in the bag. At night, he'd go home and work the lines up into a poem, no matter how disconnected and loose-leafed they were. His mother once said, "He won't stop until he has vomited out his heart." And so he did. Like John Keats, he died believing his name will never be written among the characters. Without hope, he thought himself, that worst curse, unlucky. At 27, at death's line, he saw a man come, in purple, driving a red dragon, a tablet in one hand, who said, "I'm here to summon Lee Ho." Ho got from his bed and wept. Far from the sick rooms, dragon dark, snow stormed the passes, monkeys surfed the bow trees, and foolish men ate white jade. How mournful the southern hills are, how white their despair, under December's tang blue blank page. What's the use of words? There are no words for December's chill redaction, for the way it makes us feel. We hang like clouds between heaven and earth, between something and nothing, sometimes with shadows, sometimes without. Okay, again, from the title and even the content of the poem, we get the theme of half. Quote, poem half in the manner of Lee Ho, uh, unquote. That's one concept that's evocative, the idea of all things containing half this, half that, life versus death, light versus dark, etc. This is, as we noted before, a concept and theme that runs the entire breadth of this collection. It permeates it, in fact. Also, I thoroughly enjoyed the wisdom encapsulated in the opening stanza. Quote, all things aspire to weightlessness, some place beyond the lip of language. Again, grappling with language, as we see in other poems. Some silence, some zone of grace. There's some great sounds going on here, with specific regard to consonants, such as the repetition of the S's and P's, and the assonants, such as we see in the repetitions of the A's and the O's, to name a few. The entire poem is packed with, actually, with sonic manipulation, made available by way of the consonants and assonants. The wisdom, as I mentioned in this poem, of how, quote, all things aspire to weightlessness reminds me of gravity. The weight of the world pressing down upon us, gravity, that immutable principle that maintains the balance of the cosmos. This is also, it seems, especially in light of the collection's ultra focus on time, communicating the idea of how we are sprung from gravity when born, acclimated to its forces as we grow to adulthood, and then as we get older, we're pulled back towards the dirt of this planet only to become weightless once more as we die and eventually decay. So I think there's a lot of meaning and wisdom in there. Another personal aesthetic of Wright's is translation. He often uses Chinese poets like Li Ho to enter, extend, or even to triangulate its locus of concern. If you remember what that means, what meaning the poem is attempting to impart. He actually incorporates Li Ho three more times in this collection in three separate poems. In this way, because Wright is translating and because he's accessing this historical figure, this artifact from the past, Wright is adhering to the postmodern theory, whereby, if you recall, literature, among other arts, borrows from a past artifact with all its already built-in meaning and thrusts it into the present by incorporating it side by side with the current work. He did this by mentioning John Keats in the poem as well. Finally, we get that binary opposition afforded us through structuralist theory. One example being the last tercet. Quote, we hang like clouds between heaven and earth, between something and nothing, sometimes with shadow, sometimes without, unquote. This blending of language, of translations, of halves, of past poets, of various literary theories, in what Wright called in the interview we watched, an accretion of sorts, whereby the artist, in this case the poet, blends various elements together to forge something more complex with greater channels of meaning. Something I feel Charles Wright is adept at in engaging us through this accretion process. Okay, another really great and evocative poem that I really enjoyed was Black Zodiac. So I'll go ahead and read that, and then we will talk about it. Black Zodiac. Darkened by time, the masters, like our memories, mix and mix match, and settle about our lawn furniture like air, without a meaning, like air in its clear nothingness. What could we say to either of them? How can they be so dark and so clear at the same time? They ruffle our hair, they ruffle the leaves of the August trees, then stop abruptly as wind. The flies come back in the heat. What can we say to them? Nothing is endless but the sky. The flies come back, and the afternoon teeters a bit on its green edges, then settles like dead weight, next to our memories and the pale hems of the master's gowns. Those who look for the Lord will cry out in praise of him, perhaps and perhaps not, dust and ashes though we are. Some will go wordlessly, some will listen their way in with their mouths, where pain puts them an inch and a half above the floor. And some will revile him out of love and deep disdain. The gates of mercy, like an eclipse, darken our undersides. Rows of gravestones stay our steps. August humidity, bright as auras around our bodies. And some will utter the words, speaking in fear and tongues, hating their garments splotched by the flesh. These are the lucky ones, the shelved ones, the twice erased. Dante and John Chrysostom might find this afternoon a sidereal road map, a pilgrim's way. You might too. Under the pre-jaundiced outline of the quarter moon, clouds sculling down sky like a narrative for whatever comes, what hasn't happened to happen yet, still lurking behind the stars. 31 August 1995. The afterlife of insects, space graffiti, white holes in the landscape. Such things, such avenues lead to dust and handle our hurt with ease. Sky blue, blue of affinity, blue, waters above the earth. What do the great stories always exist in the past? The unexamined life's no different from the examined life. Unanswerable questions, small talk, unapprovable theorems, long abandoned arguments. You've got to write it all down. Landscape or waterscape, light length on evergreen, dark sidebar of evening. You've got to write it down. Memory's handkerchief, death's dream, an automobile, God's sleep. You've got to write it down. Moon half empty, moon half full. Night starless and egoless. Night blood black and prayer black. Spider at work between the hedges. Last bird call. Toad in the damp place. Tree frog in a dry. We go to our graves with secondary affections. Second-hand satisfaction, half sold. Star charts demagnetized. We go in our best suits. The birds are flying. Clouds pass. Sure, we're cold and untouchable, but we are harbor no ill will. No tooth tune to resentment forks. We're out here and sweet meat. Calligraphers of the disembodied, God's words, wards. What letters will we illuminate? Above us, the atmosphere. The nothing that's nowhere signs on and waits for our beck and call. Above us, the great constellations sidle and wince. The letters undarken and come forth. Your X and my X. The letters undarken and they come forth. Eluders of memory. Nocturnal sleep of the greenhouse. Spirit of the slides and silences. Invisible hand. Witness and walk on. Lords of the discontinuous. Lords of the little gestures. Succor my shift and save me. All afternoon the rain has rained down in the mind. And in the gardens and dwarf orchard. All afternoon, the lexicon of late summer has turned its pages. Under the rain, abstracting the necessary word. Autumn's upon us. The rain fills our narrow beds. Descriptions and element like air or water. That's the word. All right. Another poem that is exemplary of those themes that we spoke about earlier, such as halves, equilibrium, time, and binary oppositions, is what's in this poem. What is called this is actually called the collection's titular poem, as it shares the same title as the collection itself, Black Zodiac. So let's parse some of the elements I just mentioned. There are some dark themes built in, through dark language in this poem. Think of theme also affecting tone. So in this case, dark language creates dark themes, especially if they are recurring throughout the collection, which in turn lends itself to dark tone. I would, without hesitation, say that there are some moments where here in the poem, where Wright, the theme is using theme and tone to lend themselves to darkness and even shadow. Uh, if we press the content of this poem through the prism of postmodernism, I think, which we can be very successful at doing, we can unpack the history of Dante and John Chrysostom, and even Socrates, that he doesn't name outright, but certainly he's quoting from, and we'll mention that in a second. Dante, as most of us will know, and who Wright likes to quote from, was the 14th century Italian author of the epic poem Divine Comedy, which represents the journey of the soul toward God, with the Inferno describing the recognition and rejection of the sin. So definitely themes and subject matter that the entire collection is addressing. John Chrysostom, on the other hand, was the Archbishop of Constantinople in the 4th century Common Era, who died in exile due to protesting corruption in the Catholic Church. So you can extract some meaning from that. Perhaps, whatever that meaning is, though, we should consider it highly methodical on Wright's part, as he knew that those two artifacts from the past aid in informing us of the poem's ultimate meaning. Also within the line, quote, the unexamined life is is no different than the examined life, unquote. We get the idea of halves here by way of the binary opposition of examined and its opposite, right? It's diametrically opposed to the examined, right? So there's a two binary opposing words and ideas. We also get the postmodern stroke due to the borrowing of an artifact from the past, in this instance, the ancient Athenian philosopher Socrates, who was infamous for making this declaration at his trial, where he was eventually found guilty for corrupting the youth and subsequently forced to drink hemlock until his death. So we can really start to see a thread begin to materialize between Dante, Chrysostom, and Socrates. So those things are like death, meaning of life, time, our afterlife, all in the attempt to probe the depths of the human condition. So some of the imagery and language that I was able to notice within this poem also is lending itself, and you should attempt to parse it if you want to write an essay on this. Attempt to lend itself to birds. A lot of bird imagery in there and language that build up to give us this imagery of birds. There's our friend, or Lee Ho, deceptively hiding behind the lecture. So questions, as always, please email me if you have any questions or concerns or points of clarification that you need me to provide answers to. Also, please be on the lookout for your essay grades in Blackboard, your short essay number 1 in Blackboard, the grade center by Friday, the end of the day on Friday probably. You should have 2 grades that are already entered for the open-ended question number 1 and the discussion on Blackboard, so you can look at that if you want. Everybody did really well. Everybody really seems to be catching on to the information we're imparting on these collections. I understand that Black Zodiac is a challenging collection. I'm trying to give you, to that end, I'm trying to give you plenty of ideas of ways of angles to approach it within your short essays. So bear that in mind. Quick note, and on that note, it's a good segue, is October 8th, we'll comment on the open-ended question number 2. I'll send instructions for that next week, so be on the lookout for that email. That's it, guys. I hope you have a good day and enjoy listening to this lecture, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.